Hello everyone, this video is going to be about secondary leading tones and secondary dominant chords. So to understand how these chords work, we first have to look at this basic chord progression, this diatonic progression, 1-5-1 in C major, and think about the functions of the chords. So by that I mean tonic, dominant to tonic. So let's take a listen to this basic chord progression that includes this little neighbor tone motion. Notice this F is a neighbor tone to the G natural here, so, fa, so. And let's hear how that sounds. Great, so we hear how this F goes back to G, but it doesn't really pull us to that G, right? And if we wanted to have this line lead to G in some capacity, we have a great option here of using a chromatic neighbor tone instead of a diatonic one. So that's where we see this F sharp in this next phrase here. So let's take a listen to that. Simply by making this whole step, F to G, a half step, F sharp to G, suddenly we've created, in effect, something like a leading tone, right? And now that half step, that really small interval, wants to drive forward to resolve. So hear the difference now. Right, and you can hear how suddenly this melody, the soprano line, really pulls forward. So here they are back to back. Now the chromatic. Great, and so we can hear the difference there. And now this is still a neighbor tone because this F sharp is not being harmonized. It's still a non-chord tone against this C major chord right here. Now, if we were to harmonize this note, if we were to try to harmonize that chord, then that's what allows us to have secondary dominant chords or secondary function chords. What we're doing is really creating a leading tone that's working in another key, just very briefly. So in this case, when we have this chord progression 1-5-1, obviously we have a leading tone, B natural, in the 5 chord leading to C, right? Going to C, it's T to Do in C major. You can see that here. And we can take that same principle, that half step, and apply it to this chord, G, happens to be the 5 chord in C major, and that's where the F sharp comes in. So if we look down here at the second system of our worksheet, we start with this diatonic version of this chord. Now notice that this is just 1-2-5-1. So let's listen to that. So again, a pretty standard chord progression there. But what if we want to take what we learned up here, create a little leading tone, turn this whole step into a half step, and really pull towards G? Well, let's do that. Let's just take this F natural, add a sharp. Now these melodies will match now. And let's do some more analysis. So instead of a D minor 7, that's no longer true. Now what do we have instead? We have a D7. Okay, because F sharp turned this D triad from minor to major, that means that this Roman numeral will no longer work either, right? Now it's 2-7. Well, not anymore. Because it's functioning in a different key. And so I'm just going to hide that and reveal the Roman numeral here, 5-7 of 5. So let's think about what this symbol means, this Roman numeral. Underneath the slash here, so underneath this slash, we see 5. That means this chord is leading to the 5, right? That's what that means. And you can see that because the next chord happens to be 5, right? And we talked about the leading tone, F sharp to G. So why did we harmonize it with D? That'll give us the answer to what is this first 5 doing. We harmonized this F sharp in a D7 chord because we want it to sound like, and we want it to have a dominant function. So what our dominant function chords sound like? They are sometimes just major triads, but more often than not, they are major triads with a minor 7th, what we call most of the time just the dominant 7th chord, right? Because it's so common, and it's almost always used as a dominant 7 function chord. It's almost always a dominant chord. And so if we go to G, we'll think about the note that we're leading to. Now let's think about the entire chord, G major. What is the 5 of G major? Well, it's D, right? And if we had the 7, D7. And so that's why we have this D7 here. And we see the voice leading works G, F sharp to G. So this is what we call the F sharp. This is what we call the secondary leading tone. And when it's harmonized like this in this complete 7th chord, it's a secondary dominant. So now let's listen to this chord progression with the F sharp. Cool. And so what we see there, and hopefully you can hear, is how this D7 really pulls us to G. Great. All right. And now let's take a look at another example. We can, of course, do this, take this leading tone idea, the secondary leading tone idea, and apply it to any other major or minor triad within a key. So here we're thinking about, in this example we just listened to, we're thinking about emphasizing 5. We're emphasizing G by having a dominant chord of G resolved to G before moving on in a chord progression that works within the key. So we can do the same thing with other chords in the key. So any major or minor triad, you can tonicize. So let's take 6 as an example. So this is our A minor triad. And what we have here so far is just a really simple 5, 3, 6 chord progression. Right, so we get 5, 3, 7, 6. So G, E minor 7, A minor. And of course, we're still working in the key of C major. If we want to take this diatonic progression, right? Notice there's no accidentals, and make it a chord progression with a secondary function. We have to start by looking at the chord that we are going to emphasize, the chord that we want to lead to, right? So what do we need a leading tone to resolve to? In this case, we're going to go to A minor. So what's the leading tone of A minor, or A major for that matter? It's going to be, remember, leading tone is always a minor second below the given pitch. So instead of G natural, G sharp, right? So now we get G, G sharp. There's our secondary leading tone, which resolves up a half step to A minor, which we can consider our secondary tonic here. All right, so once again, same thing, we suddenly don't have an E minor 7, we have an E7, right? This E, G, BD becomes E, G sharp, BD, so now it's a major triad. That's our dominant 7th chord. And so it's no longer a diatonic harmony, so we can't use just a plain old Roman numeral like this 3. It's not functioning like a 3 chord anymore in C. It's now doing something else. This G sharp sends it aurally, right? In our ear, we now hear this chord doing something else. We hear it functioning as a dominant of 6, a 5/7 of 6. So let's listen to this now with the G sharp. And I'll now remind us what it sounded like without the G sharp. So this is E minor 7. All right, sounds perfectly good, right? But now add that G sharp in and listen to how it pulls us to the A minor chord. All right, so if we take this principle and apply it to some other examples, let's see what we get. So this time, we want to start here by looking at, in this practice example, tonicizing D minor in the key of C. We're going to stick to the key of C for now. And so we just want to complete the chord. So first, what do we have here? We start with F major, so the 4 chord in C, which I've filled in for us. And then we end in D minor. Remember what I said in the last example, we always want to look at the last chord, or the chord that we're going to tonicize first, and then take a step back to figure out what the dominant of that chord is going to be. You can't just go left to right, because the function of these secondary dominant chords is dependent on what comes next. So we have to look at them together. So the D minor, which is of course 2 in C, in the key of C major, so we can put our Roman numeral there. And we already have, in this example, the leading tone. So C sharp, of course, is going to be the secondary leading tone, which is resolving to D minor. So the leading tone of D is C sharp. Okay, how do we figure out what the 5 chord is in D? Well, pretend for a second that you're in D minor and go up a perfect fifth, D up to A. So here's D, A, so do to so. And then you figure out that it's going to be A. So A, we could also do A7, but let's do an example now with just a triad. And now all we have to do is fill in the rest of this chord. So let's do that. There's our A major chord. And remember how I notate this in the Roman numerals. You start with the note under the slash, right? So this 2 chord, because that's where this chord resolves. That's the most important thing. You're always working from the chord of resolution, thinking of this like your secondary tonic, and then going and taking a step back to the secondary dominant chord, A, in this case, A major. And it's functioning like a 5 chord, right? So this is where this 5 comes from here, 5 of 2, right? It's a 5 chord in the key of 2, in the key of D minor. So this is what that sounds like when it's completed. Right? It kind of sounds like we moved to D minor a little bit there. That's great. That's what we want. We're briefly, just for 2 chords, sort of in D minor. All right, let's look at another example. We're still in C for this one, still in C major. And I've added a tonic chord here at the end. So we have to add the melody, and we have to figure out what the Roman numerals should be. So we can actually start just with what we have already, what we have taken care of first. So first, let's take a look at the very end. I just want to fill in our lead sheet symbol there. So we get C. And how about Roman numerals? Start from the beginning. F is our first chord. So we have this F6 here, right? First inversion F major chord. Notice that I am not, just for now, I'm skipping the slash notation to indicate inversion in the lead sheet symbol, just because I don't want it to become confused with the slash notation, which is totally separate, that we use for the secondary dominance. So we're not going to worry about inversions in the lead sheet symbols for now, just note name and quality. So F major, we have a 4/6 chord. That chord is going to move to this, which looks like some sort of D chord. So diatonically, we would think probably D minor 2, right? And so we'll come back to that one. Here's the chord that we're going to tonicize in this case. So this chord is actually complete, just in the left hand with no melody. There's our 5, and we can put G right there. Now, I'm going to fill in this melody note here, G, because I know that I want to emphasize the note G, the pitch G, right? So that's the chord where, that's the chord to which I'm creating a leading tone. So in other words, now that I figured this out, I'm going to 5, I'm tonicizing 5. What is the leading tone of G, of 5 and C? Well, this is just like the examples at the top of the page. It's going to be F sharp. And so let me reveal this to you. The F goes to F sharp, goes to D. And what do we have as our Roman numeral? We have 5/7 of 5. Here we go. Let's take a listen. And so I've included this last tonic chord just to prove to you that we haven't changed keys here, right? We haven't gone to G major and stayed there. We just sort of hinted at G major. It's kind of like a shade, right? A shade of C major that has F sharps in it, right? So it's kind of a little G-like C major sound. Great. So let's do one more example here. So going to the last system on the page. Here is my 2 chord that I want to tonicize. And I have a 4 chord that I'm starting on. And so I basically just want to fill in that gap. So again, doing lead sheets first is always going to be really helpful. So let me just put these down here for us. And let me explain how we figure this out. So the D minor, that should be clear because we've been given this Roman numeral 2. So in C major, that's D minor. Now, figuring out the 5 of D minor. Okay, so what's the dominant of D? Always and forever going to be A, right? A perfect fifth above. Think Do. If D is Do, then A is So. So there's our A chord, and we're going to do A7 here. You could do a triad, or you could do a 7th chord, as long as it is a dominant 7th chord. So in other words, a major triad and a minor 7th. So A7 is going to be my secondary dominant. Before I fill in any notes, I can also add in my Roman numerals here, because I know the function of the chord, right? I know that I'm going to have a 5/7 chord that resolves to 2, right? So I got to think, okay, 2, D minor, what's dominant of that? 5/7 of 2. That's how I get my A7. So let me show you what I did here. Thinking about this chord, it's really important that you think about every interval and just make sure that you're building up each interval correctly. So in other words, from the root note, A. I need to make sure I have a major third, C sharp. If I had a fifth here, I would need to make sure that that's a perfect fifth. So that would be E. I've omitted the fifth here in the seventh chord to double the root, but I have to have, of course, for a seventh chord, I have to have a seventh, and that's got to be a minor seventh. So A to G natural, right? And so there is my major minor seventh. Here's just this chord, right? That is that dominant seventh sound, right? The major triad minor seventh. And that resolves correctly to the D minor here. So here's the entire thing. And I've just included a little quick 5-7 to 1 here at the end to, again, prove to you and prove to your ear that we haven't changed keys to D minor. We're still very much in C. We just briefly tonicize. In other words, we briefly lean on the 2 chord on D minor. And we do that, again, by creating a chord that functions like a dominant to the D minor chord. So final example here is one that I'm going to let you guys work out. This is C major, and again, we're tonicizing 5. So just give you some quick hints here, but I'll let you work out the details. Make sure that you're thinking from the 5 chord backwards, right? So figure out what the 5 is going to be. In C major, that's of course going to be G, and then back up from there. Once you know you want to tonicize G, you can figure out what the dominant of G is going to be. That will be your second chord, right? So whatever you figure out as the dominant of G, that's got to be chord number 2 here right in the middle. Okay, so thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was helpful, and let me know if you have any questions.